Stories have power. But what happens when that power drifts away from the screen and into the minds of the audience? The answer is a second hidden canon made of whispers, speculation, and theories. The story of a galaxy does not end when the credits fade. It continues in late-night conversations, in half-remembered scenes, and in questions about what the films never dared to show. Over time, this quiet, parallel history of Star Wars has grown dense, tangled, and strangely comforting in a universe defined by the Force, an energy field that binds the galaxy together. Imagination becomes another current flowing through it. Fans study every frame, every line of dialogue, every unexplained gap in galactic history. And in that space between what is shown and what is only implied, something else begins to grow. Not official lore, not clear, light side or dark side truth, but theories. Some careful and insightful, others twisted, absurd, or quietly unsettling. Yet in the stillness of the night, even the worst of them can become gentle when a saga is this beloved expectation turns into gravity. Every unanswered question pulls at the mind until explanations appear from the shadows. Jar Jar Binks reimagined as a hidden Sith mastermind, controlling the fall of the Republic Palpatine, secretly saving Padme and faking her death for a deeper plan. Mace Windu surviving his fall and haunting the Empire from the margins. What followed was a wave of speculation that drifted far beyond authorial intent and into the realm of bedtime folklore tales told in hushed tones, not to convince, but to pass the hours until sleep arrives. Tonight, the focus is not on the greatest theories, but on the worst, the most cursed, overreaching, and bizarre visions that fandom has produced. The idea that the entire sequel trilogy is nothing more than a Force dream seen by Luke Skywalker. The suggestion that the Force itself is a sentient, malevolent presence trolling the galaxy through endless conflict and war. These are not arguments to win, they are strange constellations in the dark sky of the franchise, oddly relaxing when treated as a calm documentary rather than a debate. The pace here will remain slow, measured and steady. There will be no shouting, no sudden jump cuts, no harsh verdicts, only a quiet walk through Jar Jar conspiracies, Force, nightmares, and galaxy-sized plot holes. Each theory will be placed gently on the table, examined for its logic, its origins, its impact on the wider myth, and then left to dissolve as attention drifts the way a dream fades at dawn. This is not a trial, and there is no need for anger. Each idea will be treated as an artifact from another timeline, a relic of what fans thought or feared or hoped at different moments in Star Wars history. For the next 1,000 years, these theories will never be canon, yet their presence reveals how deeply the saga has sunk into collective memory. What they found there would change everything. Not the official story, but the understanding of how stories live in the dark. As this journey begins, the task is simple. Listen as each theory unfolds. Recognize its shape, its absurdity, its quiet charm, and allow it to lose its power until only the hum of the galactic background remains. A galaxy of bad ideas, framing the worst theories as a calm historical archive. In every age, stories of power attract commentary. Stories of power that span planets and generations attract something stranger. Entire ecosystems of interpretation grow around them over time until the original tale becomes only the core of a much larger formation. What followed was inevitable for a saga that opens with a crawl and a promise of a galactic civil war. From 1977 onward, Star Wars functioned as a modern mythos rather than a single film series. Myths invite retellings and contradictions. They invite the tension between the dark side and the light side, not only within the story, but within the audience. The story of the Jedi and the Sith became a shared language, and once a story becomes shared, it begins to fracture into countless private versions, each one insisting on its own hidden canon. In one corner stand the serious archivists of lore calmly debating the exact limits of Palpatine's Force abilities or the legal structure of the Imperial Senate. In another corner, far from official guides and reference books, late at night, the stranger currents of fandom move there. Frantic posts, assemble screenshots, and half-remembered interviews into arguments that Jar Jar Binks was a secret Sith mastermind, or that the Force itself is a malevolent intelligence quietly trolling the galaxy. This is the realm where logic bends, but passion remains absolute, where a clumsy Gungan's improbable political promotion is treated as evidence of dark side mind tricks, and where a missing body after a fall from a Coruscant tower means Mace Windu must still be alive, somewhere in the shadows, guiding events. What they found there would change everything, not for the canon but for the comfort of anyone trying. To sleep while imagining a purple-bladed ghost, general in exile for the purpose of this quiet chronicle. These theories will be treated as if they were calm entries in an in-universe holocron. Each speculation becomes a data crystal carefully labeled Jar Jar as orchestrator of the prequel war Palpatine, secretly preserving Padme and faking her death. The sequels as nothing more than a prolonged Force vision. In Luke's mind, each fragment will be catalogued, examined, and set gently beside the others, without judgment to keep this archive clear. The path through it will follow the films themselves. First, the prequel era, with its Senate debates and hidden Sith, then the original trilogy, with its Rebel Alliance and Fallen Empire. Then the sequels and the uncertain balance between light side and dark side, beyond those lie animated series novels and abandoned outlines that would shape entire branches of speculation. Along this route, the worst theories become mile markers, secret, Sith, Gungan's dead. Sound the characters who never died, an entire trilogy that might not be real at all. And in the distance, stranger ideas wait the Force as a conscious trickster, the galaxy as a looping vision. The next phase of this journey turns now to the prequel era, where the first great monument of bad theorizing stands in the shadow of Naboo. When canon sleeps, how fanbrains fill the gaps in the Force. In the shadow of Naboo, another presence waits, not a hidden Sith Lord, but something quieter, the way the mind reaches for meaning when the story refuses to answer every question. Power unsettles, and absence unsettles even more when canon sleeps. Imagination moves to fill the dark in a galactic saga ruled by an energy field that can move objects, cloud mines, and cheat death. Empty spaces never stay empty. For long, unexplained powers, missing bodies off-screen, hours between scenes, these become open doors. The Force can do almost anything, so the mind quietly asks if it can do anything, then what else is happening? Behind the curtain, the story of bad theories begins there, in that soft uncertainty over time. Small gaps become invitations. Jar Jar's impossible acrobatics on Naboo, his sudden leap from outcast to senator, his role in granting emergency powers to Palpatine. Each detail is ordinary within the prequel conflict, but gathered together they begin to shimmer. Pattern seeking takes hold. Scattered moments are arranged into a secret design, and what followed was an interpretation in which a clumsy Gungan is recast as a hidden Sith mastermind, directing the fall of the Republic. This is the comfort of connection. Random lines, props, and background choices are woven into conspiracies that feel satisfying because they impose order where none was promised. Mace Windu's missing body, plus the precedent of Jedi surviving long falls, plus a single purple lightsaber, become evidence of a survivor manipulating events from the shadows. The text does not demand this reading, but the pattern offers a calm answer to a nagging question. He fell. Therefore, he must still be moving somewhere beneath these patterns. Another instinct waits. Status inversion for thousands of years. Stories of the Jedi and the Sith have turned on clear hierarchies, masters and fools, survivors and victims. The worst theories would shape those hierarchies into their mirror image. Jar Jar becomes the architect, not the joke. Padme's death becomes a staged illusion preserved by Palpatine's hidden mercy. The Force itself is reimagined as a prankster intelligence trolling the galaxy, rather than a neutral current between dark side and light side. Often, the first step is reasonable, a missing scene, a vague line about powers many consider to be unnatural, the will of the Force mentioned but never defined. Then more and more evidence is pressed into service until the frame bends. The sequel trilogy becomes not a messy continuation, but a single dream vision, In Luke's mind, abandoned concepts from development notes are treated as clues. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, is replaced by this act of interpretation, would rewrite galactic reality for the next 1,000 years of fan discussion. These drifts repeat from plausible seed to galaxy-breaking nonsense. The current remains the same in the next section. That current will be traced through the first great monument of bad theorizing on Naboo, following each gentle step until the water suddenly drops away. Enter the clown, setting the stage for the Jar Jar Binks Conspiracy. In that slow drift from speculation to reinvention, one figure waits at the bottom of the current, a single Gungan whose presence would shape an entire era of fan obsession. This is the story of how a background clown became the imagined architect of galactic darkness. In the canon of the Phantom Menace, Jar Jar Binks enters as a banished Gungan outcast, rescued from a tank tread on the swamps of Naboo. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, not through intent, but through a chain of accidents. He leads Jedi to Otoh Gunga, negotiates passage through the planet's core, and later stands amid the liberation of Naboo, flailing through battle droids in chaotic acrobatics. He is present when Queen's bargain armies assemble, and the first open moves of the Sith return to the galactic stage from the beginning. There is tonal dissonance. The film opens with trade blockades and secret Sith Lords speaking in hushed corridors of power. The stakes involve the fall of the Republic and the return of the dark side. Into this steps a wide-eyed Gungan who trips over his own feet and steps in alien creatures' droppings. The contrast is stark, a slapstick figure wandering through a story of war and political collapse. The result is a character who feels suspended between children's holovid and tragic opera over time. That dissonance fed resentment. Jar Jar's voice, his mannerisms, his constant missteps were received as annoying childish, a distraction from the promised tale of Jedi and Sith. Many viewers rejected him outright. Others felt something stranger, that such a prominent presence in the first prequel could not simply be comic relief in a narrative otherwise obsessed with destiny prophecy and the weight of the Force. The backlash created a vacuum, and fan culture rarely allows a vacuum to remain empty. Into that empty space came a new instinct. If the surface is unbearable, then the surface must be a mask. What followed was a search for hidden depth, a determination to find in Jar Jar some secret power that would justify every moment of screen time. Some argued that no one so incompetent could keep stumbling into the center of events without design. He guides Jedi. He survives battles. He ultimately stands in the Senate at the exact moment emergency powers are granted to Palpatine, a single vote that accelerates the fall of the Republic. The seed of the theory rests here on that Senate platform, in the shadow of the future Empire. If Jar Jar is present at so many critical junctions, if his foolishness repeatedly advances the designs of the Sith, then perhaps he is not a fool at all. Perhaps the clown is a mask, and beneath it waits a dark manipulator of the Force. In the next section, that mask will be lifted step by careful step, examining each piece of evidence as though reading the founding scripture of a very strange cult. The drunken master Gungan, Jar Jar's accidental acrobatics to the believers. This is where the story of Jar Jar stops being comic relief and starts to resemble a hidden martial discipline power. In this reading is not announced with a red blade or a hooded cloak. It is expressed through stumbles, falls and flailing limbs that somehow always serve the dark side. The battlefield of Naboo becomes their primary exhibit, a quiet war of interpretations fought frame by frame on the grassy plains during the Battle of Naboo. Jar Jar is presented as a conscripted civilian dragged into galactic conflict, yet his body does not behave as an untrained bystander. Instead, it moves with an uncanny survivability. He trips over energy balls and they roll perfectly into droid ranks. He is dragged behind a tank and emerges unbroken. He clings to a battle droid's barrel in apparent panic, and in the chaos that follows, what looked random begins to resemble choreography. Proponents focus on his improbable acrobatics in that battle. They point to the way he performs long spinning jumps without preparation, the way he tumbles through crossfire and somehow avoids every lethal shot. The most cited moment comes when a dropped blaster lands on his foot. He kicks reflexively. The weapon spins through the air, and its wild bolts strike only droids. Never Gungans, never allies in a war film. This reads as slapstick. In a Sith theory, it becomes evidence here. The drunken master trope enters the argument in martial arts cinema. The drunken master appears weak, unsteady, and foolish. Yet every sway is calculated, every misstep, a trap. The theory claims Jar Jar adopts the same mask. He pretends to be clumsy, so enemies underestimate him. His flailing limbs conceal deliberate strikes. His panicked shrieks hide precise control of the Force. What followed was a complete reversal of intent. The clown becomes the predator. Under this lens, his survival itself becomes suspicious. An ordinary Gungan dragged through tank formations, thrown among exploding boomers, and dangling from war machines should die quickly. Instead, Jar Jar emerges not only alive but strangely effective. Entire droid squads are dismantled indirectly by his presence. He never consciously aims, never deliberately fights, yet the battle tilts around him as though an unseen current of the Force is bending events to favor his side. The theory insists these are not coincidences, but micro-adjustments of fate. Subtle uses of the Force disguised as buffoonery, a nudge to a blaster's angle, a fractional shift in momentum during a fall, a momentary distraction in a droid's targeting matrix over time. Every pratfall becomes a potential Force push, every flail, a hidden pull. Once that interpretive lens is adopted, ordinary comedic choreography is reframed as secret Sith technique, and the film itself is no longer a light-side adventure, but a quiet origin of a dark manipulator. The next layer of this belief system will move from the battlefield to the Senate chamber, arguing that these same invisible currents would shape galactic law and unlock emergency powers for a waiting emperor. From bantha fodder to kingmaker, Jar Jar's impossible. Political rise from the battlefield to the Senate chamber. The pattern only grows stranger. The story of Jar Jar's political career begins in exile and humiliation. A clumsy outcast banished from his own Gungan city, rescued almost by accident when he crosses paths with Jedi on Naboo. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, because that single decision places him on a path from swamp dweller to formal representative of an entire world in the years that follow. Jar Jar becomes a fixture beside Padme Amidala, a living reminder of the fragile peace between Gungan and human societies on Naboo. On the surface, his role is ceremonial, a comic presence trailing behind a former queen. Yet over time, that harmless figure acquires real authority. By the opening of Attack of the Clones, Jar Jar is no longer just a tag-along. He has been entrusted as a full representative in the Galactic Senate, empowered to speak and vote for his people. This is where theorists pause. Power in the Republic is supposed to be the domain of seasoned politicians and master strategists. Yet the character introduced as socially inept and easily manipulated walks into the most important legislative body in galactic history, and no one objects when he sits at the same level as Padme Bail Organa and Masa Meda. Expectation says he should remain a mascot instead. He becomes a senator. The decisive moment arrives when Padme is forced to leave Coruscant after repeated assassination attempts in her absence. Jar Jar is left in charge of the Naboo delegation. What followed was one of the most fateful speeches in the prequel era, urged on by Chancellor Palpatine's inner circle. Jar Jar rises and proposes that the Senate grant Palpatine emergency powers to create a grand army of the Republic. The chamber erupts in approval. Thunderous applause answers the words of a Gungan who once tripped over his own feet to believers in the Darth Jar Jar theory. This is the smoking blaster. The fool delivers absolute power directly into the hands of a hidden Sith Lord, as if executing a carefully planted order. Every earlier moment of clumsiness becomes retroactive, camouflage. Every social misstep, a way to be underestimated until the precise vote that would shape the coming Clone War. Some take the inversion further. Usually Palpatine is viewed as the spider at the center of the web. Yet these theorists ask, what if the Chancellor himself is being nudged by something older and stranger? What if the subtle suggestions that lead him to trust Jar Jar are not his own designs, but manipulations from a shadow, using the Force in ways even a Sith might not fully perceive. In this reading, Jar Jar is not a pawn, he is a kingmaker, quietly steering both Senate and Sith toward the same precipice. To those who accept this vision, the political Jar Jar is only one mask. Behind the senator's meek smile stands a darker presence hiding in plain sight, and the next layer of the theory abandons procedure and law altogether, turning instead to the possibility that the Force itself may be laughing along with him. The eyes of a Sith, micro-expressions, storyboards, and Lucas's silence. In this version of the prequel era, the Force is not only laughing, it is leaving fingerprints in frames that were never meant to be examined so closely. The story of Jar Jar as a hidden Sith turns next to these fingerprints to the eyes of a Gungan rendered in early digital animation, and to the silence of the man who created him. Over time, theorists began to slow the films down, frame by frame. They noticed that the mask of foolishness does not always sit perfectly on Jar Jar's face. There are brief instants when the smile falls away, when the eyes narrow or track a character with a calm, almost predatory focus. The moment passes as soon as another figure turns toward him, but those few frames become evidence in this narrative proof that the clown is an act, and that behind it stands a mind measuring the room in Attack of the Clones. One such glance follows Padmé's declaration of opposition to the Military Creation Act. As the Senate erupts, Jar Jar's expression settles into something steady and unreadable before he proposes emergency powers to Palpatine. To most viewers, it is an animation artifact, a side effect of early CG performance. To believers, it is the dark side peeking through the performance of a Sith who has just moved the galactic chessboard. This scrutiny does not stop with finished shots. It reaches back into storyboards and early concept art production. Drawings show Jar Jar in more dynamic poses, leaping, spinning, and landing in stances that resemble martial forms rather than slapstick. Falls in a few pieces, he is framed low and looming, his silhouette echoing the posture of a duelist. These images were designed to explore range and energy, but in the theory, they are treated as glimpses of an abandoned plan, a version of the prequels where the Gungan would reveal terrifying power around the time of the Phantom Menace's release. George Lucas described Jar Jar as the key to all this, a simple statement about animation technology and comic relief that would shape the tone of the first film. Yet, in the years that followed, those words were lifted from their context and replayed as prophecy. If he was the key, then what did he unlock? The answer for some is a secret Sith empire, hidden in plain sight behind the Senate's chaos. More unsettling to devoted theorists is what never came. Lucas has never issued an explicit denial. Disney has not released a definitive statement. The absence of a clear refutation becomes in their reading. Another clue: silence is not disinterest but design. The quiet of a storyteller who will not reveal the final twist in this way. Normal production artifacts become relics of a hidden order. Storyboards become holocrons, stray frames become visions, and the creator's offhand remarks turn into ancient prophecy. What followed was an interpretive spiral where every shadowed glance confirms the grand conspiracy, and it is from that mindset that other theories emerge, ones where death itself and even time can be rewritten by the Force. When a meme becomes a religion, why the Jar Jar Sith theory refuses to die from that mindset. The most infamous theory in the modern fandom emerges the claim that Jar Jar Binks is not a comic relief accident, but the hidden Sith architect of the entire prequel era. This is the story of a character so widely rejected that transforming him into a secret mastermind becomes emotionally irresistible. It allows the audience to imagine that the prequels were brilliant all along, that nothing was clumsy, only coded. The emotional appeal lies in reversal. A figure mocked for ruining the tone of the films is recast as the one who truly understood the dark side. His exaggerated movements become martial discipline. His vacant stare becomes a predator's calm. His political blunder that grants emergency powers to Palpatine becomes the decisive stroke of a covert war. In this retelling, the hated Gungan is not the problem. He is the solutions over time, This creates a subtle fantasy of control without altering a single frame. The theory suggests that the films do not need to be remade, only reinterpreted every awkward line. Every misplaced gag becomes a deliberate mask hiding terrifying power. The audience is no longer at the mercy of flawed storytelling. Instead, the audience has uncovered a buried design that would shape the entire galactic tragedy of Anakin's fall. There is also the thrill of status inversion. The idea that the galaxy's greatest clown is secretly its darkest puppeteer, outmaneuvering Jedi and Sith alike, runs against every surface reading. And that is the point. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power hides behind foolishness? The answer in this theory is Jar Jar, a figure whose apparent weakness is his ultimate weapon. The Jedi ignore him, the Senate underestimates him, and the audience laughs at him, which in turn makes the imagined reveal all the more satisfying. Meme culture ensures that this reinterpretation never fully fades. Jokes, fan art, mock storyboards, and long deadpan essays keep the narrative alive. What followed was a blur between satire and belief, where no one is entirely sure who is serious and who is not. Yet the repetition matters. Each new meme functions as a tiny holocron, reaffirming that there must be something there, because the story refuses to die beneath the humor. The theory offers a comforting illusion of depth. If Jar Jar is a hidden Sith, then every misstep in the films becomes part of a master plan, not a flaw. Clumsy staging becomes misdirection. Tonal whiplash becomes deliberate contrast. The entire prequel era starts to resemble an intricate conspiracy where the Force itself seems to reward deception, and then comes the pattern interrupt. If a Gungan can secretly be a Dark Lord, then nothing in this universe is stable. Any death, any fall, any ending can be rewritten by unseen intention, from whispers that Mace Windu survived his fall, to claims that entire trilogies are only visions. The Jar Jar theory is not the final destination. It is the doorway to a darker corridor of reinterpretation where the Force and the audience compete to control the story. The fall that never ends. Opening the door to They Didn't Really Die. Theories. Once the door is open to hidden Sith Lords and secret puppet masters, another older instinct slips through behind it. The refusal to accept that a fall is truly an ending in this galaxy. Power rarely disappears cleanly. It is hurled from windows cast into reactors or dropped into endless shafts, and the story of that fall is quietly left unfinished. Throughout galactic history, characters have vanished into the dark rather than dying in clear view, and what followed was a pattern that would shape fan imagination for thousands of years. When a body is not shown, when the impact is not heard, the Force seems to leave a small fracture in reality through which speculation can grow. The question emerges if the camera turns away. Did the death really happen? Canon itself encourages this uncertainty. Darth Maul is the clearest wound in narrative logic, cut in half, thrown down a reactor shaft on Naboo. His return in animation and later, live action, transforms a definitive death into a temporary setback. Anakin Skywalker burns on the black sands of Mustafar, stripped of limbs, consumed by the dark side, yet survives through technology and hatred. Jedi in both canon and legends survive, falls from dizzying heights, using the Force to slow descent or grip passing structures. The galaxy has watched Jedi drop from speeders in Coruscant traffic, or leap from towers and stand again over time. Each miraculous survival blurs the line between the impossible and the merely improbable. If Maul can endure bisection and a reactor, if Anakin can live through immolation, then the distance between life and death becomes negotiable. In fan logic, this becomes a blank check. If one can survive, then any can survive. Every impact is reinterpreted, every explosion questioned. The Force becomes not only a mystical energy field, but a narrative loophole within this landscape. Mace Windu stands as the perfect candidate for resurrection. He is among the most powerful Jedi masters of his era, a warrior who channels both light side discipline and a brush with the dark. through his unique form of combat. His visual identity is unmistakable. The purple blade, the severe gaze, the presence that dominates any chamber. He enters his fall does not occur at a random moment. It happens at the precise instant the Republic collapses, when Anakin's betrayal is sealed and the Sith Empire of Palpatine truly begins. That timing makes his apparent death symbolically unbearable. The last great Jedi voice, directly confronting Sidious, is hurled into the night through a shattered window, lightning still coursing through his body. No funeral, no recovered body, only rain, and the endless city below. What they found there would change everything, if anything was found at all. And so, the theory grows that Mace Windu did not die, that the Force caught him, that hatred or duty sustained him in the shadows. In the next movement, the fall itself will be slowed and examine the height, the velocity, the burning arcs of lightning, the possible ledges and speeders below. From there, the narrative will descend into the imagined places where Mace might still move through the galactic underlevels, watching the Empire rise and waiting. And the most unsettling part of this theory is not that he survived, but what he might be doing with that survival. Purple lightning, rewinding Mace. Windu's final duel frame by frame, in the quiet of that office above Coruscant. The story of Mace Windu's end begins not with chaos, but with ceremony. Senators' pods stand silent. The city's endless glow presses against the transparent steel, and in the center of it all, two figures ignite the conflict, one blade crimson, one violet. The hum of power fills the air as Master and Chancellor become predator and judge. Palpatine moves first, a sudden eruption of the dark side, his form a blur as he crosses the distance in a heartbeat. 3 Jedi fall in moments, their defenses shattered. What followed was a duel that feels almost unreal in its speed, yet when examined frame by frame, it becomes strangely meditative. Each parry from Mace, precise, each step a calculated refusal to yield against a hidden Sith Lord, revealed at last over time. The momentum shifts, Mace drives Palpatine back toward the wide office window. Their sabers clash again and again until the decisive instant, the disarming blow. The purple blade crashes down and the Chancellor's weapon spins away into the shadows. In that frozen image, Mace stands over him, saber poised, the light side's uncompromising edge against the dark side's architect. Then the lightning begins a jagged eruption of blue and white that floods the room, reflected in Mace's unflinching gaze. He raises his blade, and the current bends back upon its source. Palpatine's face warps under the strain. His voice breaks into a pleading rasp, and in this suspended moment, Anakin arrives, the third point, in a triangle that would shape the galactic future. The betrayal is almost quiet. Anakin's expression torn the promise of power for Padme. Whispering through his thoughts, he moves the blues. Blade flashes. Mace's hand is severed fingers and hilt spinning away into the night, and in the very next heartbeat, the lightning returns unleashed without restraint. It strikes Mace full in the chest, hurling him backward through the shattering glass. Here, the theory begins in earnest. Mace vanishes into the Coruscant night, wrapped in electricity, falling past neon lanes and durasteel spires, but the audience never sees an impact. No broken form on a distant speeder, no search, no recovery. There is no funeral, no pyre, no empty cloak, only a broken window and the endless traffic streams far below. In a galaxy where Jedi survive impossible drops and slow their descent with the Force, this absence becomes an invitation. Fans pause the frames. Imagine a last-second reflex, a half-conscious push against the air, a crash landing into some forgotten underlevel, and from that single missing body, an alternate history grows for the next 1,000 years of fan speculation. Mace Windu does not die. He endures, scarred, furious, stripped of his rank, and his hand stalking the underbelly of the city planet, watching the Empire rise in purple shadows. And what they found there would change everything for the next theory. The ghost in the underworld, Mace Windu as a hidden guardian or vengeful wraith. In the most persistent version of this theory, the crash does not kill Mace Windu. It transforms him, stripped of his title, severed from the Jedi Council, and quite literally disarmed. He drags himself into the industrial underworld of Coruscant. There in the neon gloom among refugees, smugglers, and forgotten droids, he becomes something quieter and far more unsettling. A hidden guardian who no longer believes in the institutions he once served over time. This imagined Mace watches the birth of the Galactic Empire. From the shadows he sees, clone troopers become stormtroopers, temples become citadels, the light side drowned beneath propaganda and fear. In this telling, he intervenes only at the edges, sabotaging. Imperial shipments misdirecting Inquisitors, nudging frightened Force sensitives towards safety, then vanishing before they can ask who helped them. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history in miniature, saving lives that never appear in canon, but that haunt fan speculation in these stories. His purple lightsaber becomes a symbol rather than a weapon. The color that once marked him as unique among the Jedi now represents a deliberate balance between the dark side and the light side. Some imagine him igniting it only once in a decade, a violet flash in some forgotten alleyway, before the blade disappears, and witnesses spend years wondering whether they saw a ghost. The story of that color is used to argue that Mace always walked closer to the edge than other Jedi, that his survival would shape his philosophy into something colder, more pragmatic, and permanently exiled. There is, however, a darker branch of the theory, one in which the fall and betrayal do not create a guardian, but a wraith in. This version Mace Windu survives, but the loss of the Order, the revelation of Palpatine, and the knowledge that Anakin completed the massacre consume him. What followed was not quiet resistance, but a one-man war against anyone who serves a banner in the chaos of the dark times. This rogue Force user hunts Imperial agents and surviving Jedi alike, convinced that Council's orders and empires only lead to catastrophe. His Vaapad fighting style becomes the core metaphor for this interpretation. Vaapad was canonically a form that danced on the edge of the dark side, channeling an opponent's fury and feeding it back upon them. In the vengeful Mace theory, that same principle governs his life. He seeks out anger, corruption, and fear not to redeem them, but to turn them inward until they devour those who wield them. The line between justice and vengeance dissolves into purple light and whispered rumors. Some theorists place this spectral figure directly into known eras. They picture him just off camera, during Rebels sensing Kanan and Ezra, but refusing to reveal himself, or stalking the streets of Jedha during Rogue One, silently judging Saw Gerrera's extremism. A few even push him into the original trilogy, imagining an old, scarred hermit on some backwater world who hears of a farm boy destroying a battle station and wonders if the Force has finally chosen someone else. Beneath all the elaborate timelines and imagined encounters lies an emotional refusal to accept that such a powerful, disciplined Jedi Master could be ended in a single screaming fall. The theory becomes a quiet rebellion against narrative finality, a way of saying that the Jedi did not only fail, they endured in broken, haunted fragments. And if Mace Windu can survive, then perhaps other impossibilities are on the table, including the next theory's claim that the Force itself might be the one pulling cruel strings. The problem with surviving everything, when death stops. Meaning anything, when stories lose death, they begin to lose meaning in a saga built on the Force, on attachment, and on the danger of holding on too tightly. That loss is especially sharp. The question is simple. What happens to a mythic war between light side and dark side, when almost no sacrifice is permanent? The answer is that the story of that war starts to feel strangely weightless from the beginning. Star Wars has treated death as a hinge point in galactic history. The burning of Shmi, the fall of the Jedi in Order 66, the pyre on Endor each moment gives power to the choices that led there. Without that finality, Anakin's fear of loss has no teeth. Obi-Wan's calm surrender loses its quiet courage, and Luke's refusal to strike down his father carries less risk if everyone eventually returns from the Void Maze. Windu's death sits at the very edge of that turning point. His shattered body arcing into the Coruscant night is not only the end of a single Jedi, it is the moment the Republic's last institutional check on Palpatine is destroyed. What followed was the rapid, surgical extinction of the Jedi Order. The tragedy of Order 66 depends on the sense that the Guardians of Peace were wiped out almost to the last voice. Undo that one death, and the tone shifts if Mace survives. Hidden and wounded in the lower levels, then the fall of the Jedi is no longer a near-total annihilation. It becomes an administrative setback. There is always one more master in the shadows, one more uncounted survivor, one more reason to doubt the scale of the disaster over time. The haunting silence that follows. Order 66 starts to sound less like an ending and more like a pause screen. And once the door is open for Mace, it does not easily close if he survived that window and that lightning. Why not Kit Fisto's last plunge into the Chancellor's office? Why not Plo Koon's burning starfighter banking toward a desperate landing? Why not any Jedi whose final frame cuts away just before impact? The story of the Purge becomes a guessing game, of unseen parachutes instead of a meditation on loss. Canon already strains this boundary with figures such as Darth Maul carved in half, dropped down a reactor shaft, returned through hatred, and the dark side, his survival, works as a singular, grotesque exception, but stack Mace on top of Maul, then others upon them, and the galaxy begins to resemble a revolving door of fake-out deaths. The Force turns from a mysterious current into a narrative safety net. This is the quiet cost of endless survival theories. They do not only rewrite one character's fate, they reach backward, softening every sacrifice and every farewell. And if some theories are content to bend the past around a surviving Jedi Master, others reach further still, suggesting that entire futures, including the sequels themselves, might never have been real at all. It was all a dream, opening the door to the Sequel Trilogy illusion theory. Others reach further still, suggesting that entire futures, including the sequels, themselves might never have been real at all. This is where the dream steps in, when canon feels immovable, and every death and disappointment is locked. In some fans turn to the oldest escape in galactic storytelling, the idea that it was all only a vision at its core. This theory makes a single sweeping claim: the Force awakens the Last Jedi, and the rise of Skywalker are not literal events in galactic history. Instead, they are a single prolonged Force vision experienced by Luke Skywalker or another powerful Force user, a possible future played out in the mind rather than on any real battlefield in this telling Starkiller base, Crate Exegol. And even the final defeat of the reborn Sith Emperor exists only in the realm of potential. Over time, this idea has become a quiet refuge for those who feel the sequel era broke something important. The dream frame allows them to reject the sequels without declaring that they do not count the story of Rey Kylo Ren, and the crumbling New Republic is moved into a dreamlike, hypothetical space, a cautionary tale the Force once showed to a lone witness, rather than a definitive final chapter in the Skywalker saga. It is not erasure, it is relocation. This theory leans heavily on a long tradition of visions in Star Wars history. There is Luke on Dagobah, entering the dark side cave and confronting a phantom Vader that wears his own face. There is Anakin, plagued by dreams of Padme's death, images that drive him toward the very future. He fears there is Rey on Takodana, pulled into a storm of sound and light side fragments, seeing corridors of Cloud City, the young Jedi in the rain, and a shadowed throne. What followed was a lesson the Force has always spoken, in symbols, glimpses, and warnings. Supporters argue that if the Force can show a single duel or a single loss, it can also show an entire war. They point to Rey's fragmented vision as a template, a compressed reel of past and future bleeding, together extended to feature length. They suggest that a despairing Luke on H2, or even a meditating Kylo Ren in the shadow of Vader's legacy, could witness an entire trilogy unfold in the mind's eye and weight changed around the edges of the theory. Meta, evidence gathers. Early development chaos is recast as a symptom of unreality. Shifting directors' abandoned outlines and sudden course corrections become signs that the narrative itself is unstable. Dream logic, rather than careful design. Abrupt character turns Luke's withdrawal into bitterness. Palpatine's uncanny return as a hidden emperor of a vast Sith empire on Exegol, are interpreted as the Force exaggerating symbols of the dark side, rather than recording literal events for its believers. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, not by undoing pain, but by containing it within a warning shown once then avoided. And in the next breath, the theory promises more than comfort. It promises clues, scattered through dialogue, transitions and visions, hints that the dream has seams and that someone somewhere might yet wake up. Luke's nightmare, reading the sequels as one long vision of failure. For some fans, the most unsettling answer to the dream question is not that the sequels belong to Rey or Kylo at all, but to an older Luke Skywalker, alone in the quiet, after Endor meditating on the edge of a new era and seeing not victory but collapse. What if the story of the sequel trilogy is simply the worst possible future the Force can show him? In this reading, the time is shortly after Return of the Jedi. The Empire lies broken, the Sith are gone, and the galaxy stands on the brink of renewal. Luke reaches into the Force searching for guidance on how to rebuild the Jedi Order. What followed was not a clear path of wisdom, but a cascading vision of failure, a galactic tomorrow in which every lesson he has learned is twisted and turned against him over time. This theory reframes his controversial portrayal in The Last Jedi. The bitter, withdrawn hermit on Archto is not our real Luke, but an exaggeration born from his own fear of becoming that man. The Force shows him a version of himself who has embraced despair, who has cut himself off from the light side and the galaxy. This Luke is the nightmare endpoint of his anxieties about power, responsibility, and the cost of war. Specific moments that feel off to some viewers become symbolic rather than literal. Rey's sudden hypercompetence becomes a manifestation of Luke's fear that anyone could step into the role of Jedi without training, without discipline, without the scars he carries. Han's casual death on a catwalk and Luke's own fading into the sunset read as the Force warning him that even the greatest heroes can be discarded abruptly, that legacy offers no protection from loss. Snoke's meteoric rise and equally abrupt fall then take on a different tone. He is not a fully realized dark side mastermind, but a sketch, a placeholder for the idea that no matter how completely the Sith are defeated, a new dark tyrant can appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly, leaving only more conflict in his wake. The logic is not political. It is dream logic. Nowhere is that dream logic more apparent than in the sudden return of Palpatine. In The Rise of Skywalker, the dead Emperor's impossible survival cloning plots and hidden fleets become the purest expression of Luke's terror, that evil cannot be killed, that for thousands of years the dark side simply wears new faces but never truly ends what they found. There would change. Everything is replaced by what he sees here will never change at all. For its believers, this interpretation can be emotionally resonant. It preserves the hopeful farm boy Luke by insisting his worst traits are only shadows in a vision. Yet it also quietly erases the stakes of Rey, Finn and Poe, reducing them to projections inside someone else's nightmare. And it raises a darker question: if this is only one dream, what other visions of ruin might the Force still be waiting to show? Rey, Ren, and the logic of dreams. Coincidences, connections, and cosmic convenience for dream believers. That darker question becomes a doorway once opened. It reframes every sharp edge of the sequels as deliberate unreality, not failure of craft, but evidence of a vision unmoored from ordinary rules. In this reading, Rey does not simply grow powerful too quickly. The speed of her ascent becomes the point. Her instant mastery of the mind trick, her sudden fluency with a lightsaber, her ability to pilot the Falcon and outfly trained pilots with no formal experience, all read less as training and more as the compressed logic of a dream. Where identity and skill arrive fully formed, her connection to Kylo Ren follows the same pattern. Their sudden Force bond across light years, their shared visions in the hut, their synchronized strikes against Snoke. The dream theory treats these not as awkward conveniences, but as hallmarks of a narrative where two figures mirror one another, as archetypes rather. Then as slowly developed characters, Rey's lineage twists only deepen this effect first. Nobody, then perhaps a Kenobi in speculation, then a Palpatine. At last, each reversal feels to these theorists less like a production decision and more like the way a dream keeps rewriting the roles of familiar faces until only the emotional truth remains. Visually, the sequels offer more fuel. The return to a desert world that recalls Tatooine, yet is not Tatooine. The shattered Death Star, resting in a storm-torn sea. The throne rooms that echo both Palpatine's and Snoke's chambers. All of it begins to resemble a remix of galactic memories rather than new history. What followed was a trilogy that often seemed to look backward more than forward, and Dream advocates seize on this as evidence of a memory echo, the Force replaying Luke's past through distorted imagery. Jakku as a blurred recollection of childhood sands, the Starkiller base trench as a half-remembered Death Star run the broken throne of Exegol as an exaggerated nightmare of Imperial power. Within this framework, Kylo Ren becomes the most important figure. He stands as a composite of Luke's deepest fears, Vader's mask and voice, the failed apprentice whose fall haunts every Jedi, the seduction of the dark side that once reached for Luke on Cloud City, all fused into one unstable heir to the Sith and the Empire. He is at once the grandson of Anakin, the shadow of Ben Solo, and the reflection of everything Luke dreads becoming in dream logic. A single character can carry all of that weight, because coherence of symbol matters more than coherence of biography over time. This way of seeing begins to consume the text. If Rey's strength is a dream sign, then so is every impossible survival, every coincidence of bloodline, every return of a long-dead Sith spirit. Pushed far enough, any heightened Star Wars moment can be reclassified as proof that none of it is real. The story of a galactic saga collapses into nested Force visions each. War only another rehearsal for some unseen awakening, and that impulse to explain everything away will drive even stranger theories in the shadows beyond this one. When nothing is real, the quiet horror of retconning an entire trilogy as a vision in that collapsing maze of visions, one theory waits in the dark. The idea that the entire sequel trilogy is not history at all, but a single dream or Force vision seen by Luke Skywalker on Arch 2, in this telling the fall of Ben Solo, the rise of Rey, the war between Resistance and First Order, all dissolve at the moment. Luke opens his eyes. The galactic stakes that seem so vast contract into a private warning meant for one old Jedi on the surface. This can feel merciful. The story of a timeline many fans reject, swept away with a single awakening, yet what followed was a quiet erasure of everyone who carried that era. Rey Finn Poe and Kylo cease to be people with choices and scars. They become thought experiments projected by the Force onto Luke's mind, their courage and failures reduced to symbols in someone else's lesson, their agency drained until even their most decisive acts are only illustrations. Consider what that does to Rey's journey over time. She moves from scavenger to Jedi, from isolation to chosen family. But if all of it is a dream, her growth is not her own. Finn's refusal to remain property of a war machine no longer challenges the galactic order. It merely reassures an older hero that the light side still inspires defiance. Poe's leadership and mistakes do not shape a new generation of resistance. They simply flatter the memory of past rebellions. Even Kylo Ren's struggle between dark side and light side becomes a safe hypothetical about what might have happened to Ben Solo, rather than a tragedy that truly matters. Thematically, the damage runs deeper. For thousands of years, Star Wars has repeated one idea. New generations must face their own trials. The Force does not freeze history around one family forever. Yet if the sequels are only a cautionary scenario shown to Luke, then the future is not a place where others live and choose. It is a sandbox where the past rehearses its regrets. What they found there would change everything. The notion that the galaxy moves on is quietly revoked. This mirrors an older storytelling habit, long criticized in other media. the infamous awakening where a character discovers that entire seasons were just a dream. When that curtain drops, previous investment evaporates, the wars fought, the sacrifices made. Even deaths that once seemed final are stripped of consequence. The same chill settles over the sequel era when it is reframed as nothing more than a Force-induced nightmare. Yet this theory persists because it is soothing. For some, it spares beloved heroes from painful endings. It returns attention to the original trilogy and avoids sharing power with successors. Beneath that comfort lies a deeper discomfort with letting the saga evolve beyond its first icons. If entire trilogies can be declared unreal to protect that image, others push further, still questioning not only events, but the Force itself, wondering whether the energy that binds the galaxy together might be a conscious manipulator, reshaping destiny for its own purposes. The Force has a sense of humor. Introducing the malevolent Force troll theory, that suspicion gives rise to one of the most unsettling ideas in galactic speculation. The theory that the Force itself is not neutral at all, but a conscious presence that enjoys the chaos it creates. If the Force has a will, then the question follows, what if that will is not compassionate balance, but entertained balance? The answer is the malevolent Force troll theory. In canon, the Force is described as an energy field that surrounds, penetrates, and binds the galaxy together. It has a will. It nudges visions it calls to Jedi through dreams and prophecies, yet it is never formally treated as a character with moods or petty preferences. Instead, the Jedi speak of harmony, and the Sith speak of domination, both assuming the Force is a resource rather than an audience. But the story of the saga hints at something colder, watching from behind the curtain. Over time, some fans have pushed this implication much further. They imagine the Force as a cosmic trickster, an invisible intelligence that engineers irony, tragedy, and narrow escapes, not to preserve life, but to preserve drama. In this reading, the dark side and light side are not moral paths, but tools that keep the board in motion whenever peace threatens to last too long. Something stirs, and what followed was another carefully timed disaster. The supposed evidence begins with prophecy. The Chosen One is foretold to bring balance, yet Anakin's arrival plunges the Jedi into war, accelerates the rise of the Sith Empire, and nearly wipes the Order from history visions granted to Anakin, to Luke, and to Rey. Routinely mislead them, showing true images framed in the most destructive, impossible way. Each attempt to obey the Force's guidance opens the door to greater suffering, as if the energy field is dangling information just out of reach to see what happens next. Patterns repeat. For thousands of years, heroes rise, fall, and return in distorted forms. The Sith are defeated only for new darkness to emerge from forgotten regions. The Republic collapses only to reassemble under a different banner. Victory never feels permanent, it feels reset. The Force restores equilibrium, not by ending conflict, but by guaranteeing that conflict can never truly end. From there, the theory drifts into stranger territory. Some argue that the Force appears to arrange improbable meetings, as though it ships certain Jedi and Sith for maximum narrative impact, Luke and Vader on Bespin Rey, and Ben on Exegol. Others suggest that the return of Palpatine is less a cloning project and more a cosmic decision, a resurrected villain placed back on the board to keep the game interesting. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, not for kindness, but for spectacle. Taken to its extreme, the galaxy becomes a stage, and every being from Moisture Farmer to Dark Lord becomes an unwilling actor serving an unseen director. If that is true, then the worst fan theories about individual characters are only fragments of a deeper horror, because some speculate that the Force's cruel imagination does not stop with one timeline at all. Cosmic Prankster, reading Key Saga, moments as Force. Jokes. In this reading, the Force does not merely guide events, it toys with them. The grand saga becomes the story of a cosmic prankster, testing the limits of tragedy and irony. If the Force has a will, then what happens when that will favors spectacle over mercy? The clearest example begins with Anakin Skywalker. Born without a father and heralded as the Chosen One, he is presented as the perfect instrument to end the Sith and bring balance. What followed was a cruel loop. every step that should, have led him away from the dark, instead tightens the snare. The visions of his mother's suffering drive him to violence. The war grants him power and status while isolating him from the Jedi. In this theory, the Force births its champion only to watch him become Darth Vader, the very monster he was meant to destroy, ensuring that the prophecy fulfills itself in the most painful way possible. The pattern continues on a galactic scale through superweapons. Twice an empire builds a Death Star. Once a successor regime constructs Starkiller Base, each one a monument to fear and technological power. Yet in this interpretation, the Force is arranging elaborate domino chains. Small exhaust ports, exposed shield generators, unstable star harvesting all become pressure points waiting for a single proton torpedo or a desperate ground assault. Over time, each station grows larger and more devastating, but also more theatrically vulnerable, as though the Force is staging increasingly ornate set pieces, just to watch them explode. Visions deepen the cruelty. Anakin's nightmares of Padmé's death do not warn him in time to save her. They arrive as incomplete fragments that push him toward Palpatine and the dark side. The same Force that grants foresight withholds the crucial context. In this framework, every misleading vision from Luke's cave on Dagobah to Rey's fragmented glimpses becomes bait. The Force dangles images of loss and temptation, not to prevent catastrophe, but to provoke it. Even the rise of Rey and Kylo Ren can be seen as aesthetic indulgence. Two beings bound across the galaxy, a dyad in the Force, mirroring light side and dark side, in perfect opposition. Their abilities awaken in tandem, their conflicts echo each other, their very connection allows them to bridge space with a glance. It is symmetry for its own sake, as if the Force is arranging a balanced composition on a galactic canvas, simply because it can. Taken seriously, this theory turns every sacrifice into a punchline. The destruction of Alderaan, the fall of the Jedi, the redemption of Vader at Endor, all become beats in a long-running joke only the Force understands. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, not because compassion triumphs, but because the prank requires one last twist. In that vision, the entire saga is not a war for balance at all, but entertainment for an unseen audience, and some argue that the next step is even worse. Comfort in chaos. Why a trolling Force weirdly makes sense at 3 a.m. in the quiet hours of the night, when the galaxy outside the window feels as distant as the outer rim. A strange thought begins to settle in: what if all of this suffering is not meaningless but intentional, not guided by destiny or balance, but by a mischievous intelligence behind the Force itself? The story of the Force has always hinted at a will, an unseen current nudging events. Yet in this darker vision, that will is not wise or benevolent. It is amused the appeal of this idea rests on a simple inversion. Random tragedy can feel unbearable. A blaster bolt that happens to hit a named character, an offhand decision that ends a republic, a single misstep that ends a Jedi bloodline. But imagine instead that these losses are moves in a cosmic game. Suddenly the chaos has an author. The pain has a personality. The universe is not empty. It is trolling in a way that would shape how late-night minds interpret every fall and every failure over time. This turns even the grandest conflicts into elaborate jokes. The Clone Wars become not a tragic clash of ideology, but an experiment in how far the Force can push a galactic civil war for entertainment. The rise of the Sith Empire under Palpatine stops being the triumph of one dark genius and becomes a carefully arranged prank. The Force elevates a senator from Naboo, whispers to a frightened boy on Tatooine, and watches as Jedi and Sith march obediently into a trap they can never perceive. There is a bleak humor in imagining that the most disciplined Jedi Masters and the most ruthless Sith Lords are merely pieces on a board. Mace Windu's legendary skill, his purple blade, his fateful confrontation with Palpatine, all reduced to a setup for a punchline when the window shatters and the Force lets him fall. Anakin's entire life, from slavery to knighthood to Vader, becomes a running gag in a script written by an energy field that finds obsession and betrayal. Entertaining this perspective also offers a strange way to process the rough edges of the saga, when a character's death feels abrupt, when a plot twist appears contrived. Instead of blaming writers or canon shifts, the frustration can be projected onto the Force itself. The awkward fall of Jar Jar Binks from accidental kingmaker to banished clown becomes the Force losing interest in one joke, and moving on the controversial turns of the sequel trilogy become the Force changing the channel mid-season. Within that cruelty, there is an unexpected comfort. If the Force is trolling everyone, then no failure is entirely personal. Luke's exile, Rey's confusion, Kylo Ren's spiraling rage all become shared symptoms of a galaxy caught in the same joke. Heroes and villains suffer under the same unseen hand, and in that shared helplessness, the distinctions between dark side and light side begin to blur. What followed was a new way to dream about the saga, because once the rules of the universe have been twisted, attention turns to something more intimate, rewriting the fates of individual characters whose endings still haunt the imagination. For some, the next step is inevitable. If the Force can play with outcomes, then perhaps certain deaths were never final at all, and what they found there would change everything. Padmé's breath, opening the case file on Palpatine, secretly saved her. In a galaxy where destiny bends under the weight of the Force, even death can start to feel negotiable. The story of Padmé Amidala is often told as a tragic constant, a fixed point at the end of the Clone Wars. But what happens when that fixed point begins to look less certain? The answer is a theory that turns one of the saga's most emotional losses into something far colder. At the end of Revenge of the Sith, the sequence appears straightforward. Padmé travels to Mustafar, confronts Anakin, and is choked through the Force by the man she once loved. Her body is recovered by Obi-Wan and taken to a medical facility on Polis Massa. There amid sterile droids and humming machinery, she gives birth to Luke and Leia. Exhausted, broken, and terrified by what Anakin has become, she fades. The droids announce that medically she is healthy, yet she is losing the will to live. Moments later, she dies in a universe of bacta tanks, cybernetics, and Force healers. This diagnosis lands as an intentional mystery. Advanced scanners find no trauma, no organ failure, no poison, just absence. A gap where the will to survive should be overtime. That single line medically, she is completely healthy, has invited quiet suspicion. How does someone simply stop living in a setting where Jedi routinely survive, falls through city skylines, and Sith cling to life through sheer hatred? Earlier in the same film, Palpatine tells Anakin the legend of Darth Plague is the wiser Sith Lord who could use the dark side of the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life and to keep the ones he cared about from dying. What followed was one of the most important seductions in galactic history, the promise that death itself could be defied, that power over life and death was within reach if Anakin embraced the dark. Here, the theory opens its case file. It claims that Palpatine did more than tempt Anakin with stories. He acted according to this view. Padmé did not truly die on Polis Massa. Instead, Palpatine intervened, perhaps from afar, through the Force. Perhaps through agents arriving off-screen, sustaining her life at the edge of death, long enough to remove her from the Republic's gaze. A funeral would be staged on Naboo, a body displayed in ceremonial splendor, the pregnancy concealed to preserve the illusion of a leader gone too soon. In this reading, the funeral becomes political theater, a carefully arranged tableau to sanctify the new empire and erase awkward questions about the mother of the Skywalker heirs. It attempts to close a perceived wound in the narrative. How could someone simply die of heartbreak when Sith alchemy and Jedi healing exist, when the man who orchestrated the war openly boasts of unnatural abilities? If Padmé's breath continued somewhere in secret, then the implications would shape everything that follows, for Anakin, for the twins, for the balance between dark side and light side. The next step is to move slowly through the evidence timelines, medical logistics, and Palpatine's habits of control. Because if this act of mercy would reshape galactic history, it might be the cruelest mercy ever conceived. The plague is precedent. Unnatural life, unnatural death, To understand how that cruelty could even be imagined, the theory turns back to one of the quietest and most chilling scenes in the prequel trilogy in a galactic opera box above the shimmering performance. Palpatine speaks to Anakin about power and fear. He does not threaten, he does not rage, he simply tells a story. The story of Darth Plague is the wise, a Sith Lord who could use the dark side of the Force to prevent death and even create life around the time of that conversation. Anakin stands on the edge of his fate, tormented by visions of Padme dying in childbirth. Palpatine's tale arrives as an answer to an unspoken question. Can the Force be bent so completely that death itself obeys the will of the Sith? Palpatine implies that it can. He hints that Plague has achieved this impossible mastery and that the knowledge did not die with him, even though the films never show Palpatine healing a wound or resurrecting a corpse. Many fans hear a confession hidden inside the parable. Over time, this moment became the foundation for a darker speculation. If Palpatine knew how to cheat death, then the sudden, unexplained loss of Padme on Polis Massa begins to look less natural. In this reading, the Emperor does not simply sense Anakin's suffering through the Force, he monitors Padme's condition as the twins are born. The theory imagines him feeling her life flicker and then deciding to intervene, not as compassion, but as experiment and opportunity, a living symbol of Anakin's past bound to his new empire. What followed was an elaborate reimagining of that medical droid's simple verdict. She has lost the will to live instead of emotional collapse. Theorists propose a targeted act of dark-side sorcery. Palpatine reaches across the void and redirects Padme's life force, siphoning it away. At the precise moment, Anakin is rebuilt in the black armor of Vader. In some versions, this energy sustains Anakin's survival. In others, it is stored in a hidden facility, a secret vault of stolen vitality, waiting for some future design. The phrase "loss of the will to live" then becomes a cover story, a polite clinical mask for a far more invasive violation of the Force. Padme does not simply fade, she is taken. Her breath folded into a ritual, her heartbeat repurposed as fuel for the Empire's rise. What they found there would change everything. Is reimagined not as medical failure, but as deliberate theft, and the clean white walls of the medical station become another unseen Sith altar. Yet to accept this precedent fully, Palpatine must become almost godlike, omniscient and omnipresent, aware of every contraction, every heartbeat, every distant scream. The films show a master manipulator, a political spider at the center of a vast web, but not an all-seeing deity. This theory stretches that web until it covers every corner of the galaxy, every birth, every death. In doing so, it turns one chilling fireside legend into a universal conspiracy, and the next theories push that impulse even further, turning background figures and comic relief into supposed architects of the entire saga. The funeral that wasn't, reading Padme's procession as a galactic illusion, in that same spirit of turning background moments into grand conspiracies. Another theory reaches back to one of the quietest scenes in the saga. The funeral on Naboo power fades, but what happens when even death itself becomes part of a galactic performance? The answer is a procession that some insist was never a farewell at all. On Naboo, the camera drifts through mist and marble as the city moves in slow motion. Banners hang heavy in the rain. Citizens line the streets in dense silence. And at the center of it all, a glass coffin glides through the crowd inside. Lies Padme Amidala, hands, folded robes, immaculate face, serene, her stillness framed by flowers and ceremonial jewelry. The tragedy is underlined by one visual detail. Her dress swells around a visible pregnancy belly, a quiet signal to the galaxy that any unborn child died with her, that the last hope of the Republic was buried in the same instant. For most viewers, this is the story of a fallen democracy given a single image, the mother and child lost together while the new empire rises. But for this theory, what followed was something far colder. The funeral becomes deliberate misdirection, a stage-managed illusion orchestrated by Darth Sidious himself to hide the existence of Luke and Leia, and to fix in the public mind the idea that Anakin Skywalker's family line ended on a marble bridge. According to this reading, the glass casket is not transparency but theater. The body is either Padme in a deep healing trance or a carefully prepared double chosen to sell the narrative of total loss. From that premise, the questions multiply. If Padme survived, where was she taken? Who would know, and how could such a secret be kept from both Jedi survivors and the future rebellion? The theory usually proposes a sealed circle of knowledge. Palpatine, his most trusted agents, perhaps a single Naboo physician in this version. The Emperor extends the same unnatural, life-preserving powers he once promised Anakin, but turns them toward containment rather than mercy over time. The Quiet Queen becomes another asset buried in the shadows, a living reminder of Anakin's failure kept just out of reach. Darker variants lean fully into horror. Some imagine Padme held in stasis in an Imperial research facility, her body sustained by machines, while scientists probe the limits of the Force. Others suggest she is used as leverage against a hypothetical redeemed Anakin or against future Skywalkers, a bargaining chip that would shape impossible choices in some distant, unseen conflict in these tellings. The serene Naboo funeral masks, a prison sentence that lasts for decades, a single soft image hiding a lifetime of torment. In the end, this theory begins by trying to fix one odd story, beat the suddenness of Padme's death and the ambiguous medical explanation, and then quietly rewrites entire political and emotional landscapes. The fall of the Republic becomes another layer of staged illusion. The grief of Naboo becomes a prop, and the next theories push this instinct even further, extending that same suspicion to every missing body, every off-screen fate, every shadowed corner of the galactic war. When mercy becomes horror, the emotional cost of saving. Padme, in the prequel era, power and fear coil around one relationship more than any other, the bond between Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala. The story of his fall is not only a tale of the Sith and the Jedi, but of a single terror that eclipses galactic war. The fear of losing her from the opera house on Coruscant to the nightmare visions that haunt his sleep. Everything narrows to one choice. He will do anything to keep Padme alive around the final days of the Republic. That fear becomes the hinge of history. Palpatine does not win Anakin through abstract philosophy. He wins him through a promise. The dark side can save Padme. What followed was a sequence of betrayals that would shape the entire saga. The massacre at the temple, the slaughter on Mustafar, the kneeling before Darth Sidious, all of it anchored in the belief that only the Sith can prevent her death when Padme dies on Polis Massa. That belief collapses, and Anakin's last tie to the light side breaks with it. Her death seals him inside the armor. Vader is not just a servant of the Empire. He is a man who has already lost everything. The tragedy rests on that finality. The moment he hears that Padme is dead, his choices become irreversible. There is no one left to save, only a void to rage against. And for thousands of years of mythic storytelling, that is where such a fall traditionally ends, with loss that cannot be undone. The theory that Palpatine secretly spares Padme and hides her away tries to reopen that wound. It imagines that this act of mercy would reshape galactic history, but in doing so, it undercuts the tragic symmetry. Anakin destroys the Jedi Order, betrays the Republic, and submits to the dark side to prevent a death that never truly happens. The emotional center of the prequels is hollowed out. His sacrifice of his own soul becomes a cruel miscalculation, rather than a terrible, conscious choice. And then the horror deepens. If Padme survives in secret captivity, the story of her fate turns into something far darker than the films suggest. Imagine her imprisoned on some forgotten world, aware that her children have been hidden from the Sith, knowing that Anakin has become Vader, and that the man who engineered it all now controls the Galactic Empire. What they found there would change everything. Padme's love becomes a weapon turned against her. Her mercy on Mustafar answered with a lifetime of confinement over time. This version claims to spare her, but it grants her no peace, no closure, only endless awareness of what has been lost in trying to save Padme. The theory hands her a fate far crueler than the abrupt, almost gentle passing on screen. Instead of a final breath spoken in love, she endures as another silent casualty of the Emperor's power, trapped between the dark side and a future she can never touch beneath the surface. These theories share a common refusal to accept endings from Jar Jar's buffoonery recast as secret Sith mastery to Padmé's death. Recast as illusion, every absence demands a hidden twist, and in the next descent into speculation that instinct will only grow stranger. The Jar Jar Palpatine axis. When separate bad theories start to merge over time, the refusal to accept endings begins to do something stranger than rescuing single characters from death. It starts to rebuild the entire saga from the ground up. If one absence must hide a secret, then every absence must, and what follows was the gradual fusion of separate bad theories into a single alternate continuity in this merged vision. Jar Jar's alleged Sith mastery does not end with a Senate speech. It extends into the medical wing on Polis Massa. The story of Padmé's final moments is rewritten. Jar Jar is no longer the tragic accomplice who hands emergency powers to Palpatine. He becomes the shadow at the edge of the birthing chamber, the apprentice who helps arrange a death that never truly happens in these tellings. Palpatine draws on the same forbidden power hinted at in the tragedy of Darth Plagueis, the wise only hear. That knowledge does not merely tempt Anakin, it actively preserves Padmé. Her body is spirited away under the cover of war, replaced by an empty casket and a public funeral. The medical droids are deceived or controlled, the Force readings are clouded, and Jar Jar stands as the perfect distraction. A fool in public, a conspirator in private. This fusion would shape Jar Jar's role into something far darker than comic relief. By tying him directly to Padmé's disappearance, he becomes the deliberate architect of Anakin's despair. Every clumsy gesture that pushed the Republic toward Empire becomes reinterpreted as a calculated step in a long game. Every wide-eyed expression in the Senate is read as a mask, hiding Sith, intent. The fall of a single Jedi Knight is no longer the work of Palpatine alone, but of a hidden axis working in tandem from Naboo to Mustafar. What followed was a new pattern of thought. Once Jar Jar and Palpatine are linked to Padmé's fate, almost anything can be drawn into the same web. Stray glances between senators become coded signals. Minor continuity gaps turn into evidence of secret missions. Background droids in the operating room become potential witnesses, quietly eliminated in the night conspiracy. Style thinking thrives on this method. Every coincidence is promoted to clue. Every unanswered question becomes proof of design. The cost is coherence. Contradictions in tone and logistics are quietly set aside. The practical difficulty of faking a high-profile royal funeral under galactic scrutiny is dismissed. The emotional texture of the films, the genuine tragedy of a hero failing the one person he most wants to save, is overwritten. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history, is replaced with this hidden plot, explains everything, and for thousands of years of in-universe Jedi and historians, none of them ever notice. Eventually, these mega-theories drift so far from the screen that they form a parallel timeline, an empire of fan-authored continuity, where the dark side is always one step cleverer and the light side is forever blind. The story of the prequels becomes less a filmed narrative and more a puzzle box designed for endless decoding. And in the next layer of speculation, this instinct to connect every thread will reach beyond Jar Jar and Padmé to something far larger waiting in the shadows. The Reddit holocron, how online culture supercharges the worst ideas in the age of constant connection. Even the smallest spark of speculation can ignite a galactic bonfire of theory. A passing thought becomes a narrative. A joke becomes a doctrine. And what followed was an ecosystem where the most fragile ideas refuse to die. Instead, they evolve on a quiet thread. An offhand comment wonders whether Jar Jar Binks was a secret master of the dark side. The intention is playful, a moment of levity in a long discussion, but over time replies begin to stack. Someone posts a frame of Jar Jar executing an improbable acrobatic flip. Another notes his uncanny presence in every crucial Senate vote fan art arrives, depicting him with yellow Sith eyes. Mock holocrons appear with invented quotes, and suddenly the story of a bumbling Gungan has been reforged into a hidden architect of the fall of the Republic. This is the power of the feedback loop in digital space. Attention functions as gravity, upvotes, shares, and algorithmic recommendations pull the most extreme interpretations into orbit around familiar scenes. A measured reading of the prequels receives polite interest. A claim that Jar Jar manipulated the entire Clone War through the Force is rewarded with reactions, debates, and eventually full-length video essays. The more counterintuitive the claim, the more the system promotes it. And what they found there would change everything. Not in the films themselves, but in the mental version of Star Wars, carried by late-night viewers. The line between satire and sincerity becomes difficult to trace. Some treat the Jar Jar Sith narrative as a running joke, a shared wink in the comments. Others begin to half accept it, quietly, adjusting their understanding of galactic history to make room for a hidden Gungan mastermind. The same pattern surrounds Mace Windu surviving his fall, or Palpatine secretly preserving Padme in a forgotten medical wing. Theories begin as playful inversions of the light side and dark side, but repetition gives them weight over decades. The internet functions as a holocron of speculation. It records every wild suggestion from the Force as a malevolent intelligence to the sequels existing only as a distant vision in Luke's mind. Nothing is truly lost. An abandoned post from 15 years earlier can be rediscovered at 2 a.m., screenshotted, reshared, and reanimated for a new generation of insomniac fans for thousands of years. In universe, the Sith used actual holocrons to transmit forbidden teachings across time. Online archives now perform the same function for improbable fan doctrines in this environment. No character remains safe from resurrection, reinterpretation, or quiet corruption. Even those whose stories seemed closed decades earlier are called back to the stage. Palpatine can be recast as a secret savior of Padme, or a pawn of a trolling cosmic force. The grave offers no certainty, only a pause before the next theory, and in the next descent into speculation, attention will turn fully to those who were meant to stay dead, and the strange, dark comfort found in insisting they never truly fell at all. Palpatine's infinite lives, beyond clones, spirits, and canon into pure chaos. From that point, the next step, for some imaginations, is simple. If no grave can hold a Skywalker, then no abyss can hold a Sith. The sequels already open that door with the most improbable resurrection of all, the return of Darth Sidious himself in the rise of Skywalker canon, stretched to its thinnest edge, as the film invoked cloning ancient cultists and dark rituals to explain how the last emperor still clung to a ruined body on Exegol, refusing the end promised. Above Endor, around this moment in galactic history, a new layer of speculation emerged. If Palpatine could survive one death through science and the dark side, what stopped him from surviving all of them? The story of his return became a seed for something larger, a belief that Sidious was not merely a man, but a recurring avatar of the dark side itself. According to these theories, every era hides him under another mask. A senator in one age, a warlord in another, a nameless prophet whispering in the shadows for the next 1,000 years. In these visions, the rule of two becomes almost irrelevant because the master is always the same presence, only the apprentice changes. Some suggest that long before Sheev Palpatine of Naboo, there walked earlier Sith Lords who were already him in embryonic form, proto-Palpatine manifestations, wearing the names of ancient tyrants. They argue that the cold patience of Darth Vitiate, the theatrical cruelty of Darth Bane, or even legends of forgotten emperors all point back to a single will, testing different faces until one would shape the final empire. What followed was an even more extreme fusion of canon and conjecture. Once the sequels revealed Snoke as a disposable construct, some theorists went further, insisting that Snoke had never been a true character at all, but only a glove worn by Palpatine's spirit. In this view, the clone body on Exegol is just one more shell among countless others, a waypoint in a chain of incarnations stretching backward through galactic history. Every major dark figure becomes suspect. Every shadowed council chamber a possible hiding place for that same malignant consciousness. Over time, these ideas drift into a kind of theological claim about the Force itself. Rather than seeing evil as a pattern of choices, institutions and temptations, they condense it into one unkillable man. The galaxy's suffering is no longer the result of repeated failures, but of a single enemy who refuses to leave the stage. It is a comforting horror. There is only one monster, and the war is always against him. But what happens to the light side when the dark is reduced to a single name, pushed to that extreme? The saga's moral landscape begins to flatten. Every conflict becomes a rematch. Every fall of the Jedi, another round in the same duel between Palpatine and those who momentarily oppose him. Heroes across eras risk becoming interchangeable obstacles in one immortal ego story. And in the next descent into speculation, attention will turn to theories that push this even further, imagining not only one undying Sith, but an entire galaxy trapped in his looping dream of power and defeat. The grand unified Crackpot theory, one bad explanation to rule. Them all in that spirit, the most extreme speculation does not stop with one immortal Sith. It expands outward until the entire saga becomes a single closed circuit of secret agendas and hidden survivors. This is the story of a grand unified Crackpot theory, a vision of the galactic narrative in which nothing is accidental, and every apparent flaw is only a clue to a deeper design in this imagined continuity. The first key lies with Jar Jar Binks. The theory recasts him not as a fool, but as a Sith mastermind whose exaggerated clumsiness is a deliberate mask. His impossible acrobatics on Naboo, his convenient presence at critical moments in the war, his decisive speech granting Palpatine emergency powers all become calculated moves in a dark side campaign. Jar Jar is the hidden architect who ushers the Republic toward Empire while remaining beneath Jedi. Suspicion what followed was an attempt to resolve every lingering question by adding yet another hidden player. Mace Windu survives his fall from Palpatine's office, shattered but alive through the Force-driven underground. He watches the rise of the Empire from the shadows. His absence from galactic history becomes proof, not of death, but of deliberate concealment over time. This Mace becomes a spectral counterpoint to Jar Jar, a secret guardian whose failure to act explains why the dark side triumphs so completely to patch the tragedy of Anakin's fall. Another layer appears. Padme Amidala does not die on Polis Massa. Instead, Palpatine uses forbidden knowledge of life and death to keep her alive. Her funeral on Naboo is a stage deception. Her body, a decoy. What they found there would change everything if revealed. Padme is hidden away as leverage against Vader, her survival answering the question of how the Sith Lord is held in emotional chains long after Mustafar. The sequels then become a dream state vision, a vast Force echo seen through Luke Skywalker. In exile, every contradiction in tone or character becomes intentional dissonance. The galaxy is not truly repeating the war. It is showing Luke a possible future shaped by his failures. The deaths of Han and Luke themselves are reduced to symbols within a prophetic nightmare from which the hero might yet awaken. Beneath all of this, the Force itself is recast as a sentient trickster, a will not of balance but of mischief-steering events to create endless conflict. Heroes and villains become pieces in a cosmic experiment for thousands of years. Every coincidence, every narrow escape, every unexplained survival is reinterpreted as evidence of a malevolent intelligence trolling both Sith and Jedi. The appeal of this grand theory is clear. It promises that nothing in Star Wars is random, that every line, every prop, every background extra hides significance. Stray dialogue in the Senate becomes proof of Jar Jar's influence. A missing body confirms Mace's endurance. An odd camera angle suggests Padme's hidden escape. What followed was a dense web of meaning in which the audience is invited to feel smarter than the text, uncovering patterns that seem to grant power over the story itself. Yet the cost is equally clear. The original narrative of hope failure and redemption is buried beneath layers of metaplot. The simple tragedy of Anakin's choice gives way to an endless conspiracy. The quiet dignity of Padmé's death is replaced by secret imprisonment. The hard finality of Luke's exile and sacrifice dissolves into the safety of a dream. Even the Force ceases to be a mysterious current between light side and dark side and becomes a petty manipulator pulled to its extreme. This unified theory turns a mythic saga into a puzzle box that never opens, and in that realization, the imagination can slowly step back from the chaos the camera drifts, away from Jar Jar's imagined schemes, from Mace's unseen vigil, from Padmé's false grave, and from Luke's unreal visions, until only the familiar, canonical galaxy remains the wars, the heroes, and the failures that exist on the surface of the films themselves. And in the next quiet descent, the focus returns to that simpler story, not as a target for more speculation, but as a place of rest. Waking up on Tatooine, returning to what's actually in the films. Power invites speculation, but what happens when that power is allowed to simply be what is shown on screen? The answer is a quieter story, one that still carries enough tragedy and mystery to echo long after the credits fade. The camera settles on that story. Now, the story of the films as they are in the prequel era. Jar Jar Binks remains what the lens always presented, a well-meaning Gungan whose clumsiness accidentally pulls him into galactic events. He is rescued on Naboo, indebted to Qui-Gon, drawn into the Senate, and ultimately persuaded to grant emergency powers to Palpatine. His arc ends not as a hidden Sith, but as a tragic footnote, a minor figure whose naive trust helps doom the Republic. Mace, Windu's path is clearer still, a master of the Jedi Council, rigid, principled and unbending. He leads armies in the Clone War and confronts the Chancellor. When the truth of Sidious is revealed, what followed was a brief, desperate struggle on Coruscant. Purple Blade, against the dark side of the Force Mace, chooses to execute. Palpatine and Anakin intervenes, the lightning, the shattered window, the fall that is the end of his story. His sacrifice seals Anakin's turn and the fall of the Jedi Order. Padmé Amidala moves from idealistic queen to weary senator, watching her republic decay over time. She fights corruption, exposes war profiteers, and pleads for peace. Her love for Anakin becomes a fragile refuge as the galactic conflict deepens on Mustafar. She confronts the man he has become and loses him long before death reaches her. She dies on Polis Massa of a broken heart as the medical droids fail to name any wound. Her twins are her final act of hope, not the subject of a secret Sith experiment. Luke Skywalker's journey stretches from farm boy to legend and then to exile. He defeats the Empire, rejects the dark side, and becomes a symbol for the light side of the Force. Decades later, disillusionment and failure drive him to Arch, to where he intends for the Jedi to end. What followed was not a dream, but a crisis of faith. He trains Rey, reluctantly faces his own weakness, and returns through the Force to confront Kylo Ren. His last stand is a projection, an act of non-violent defiance that would shape the next generation. Rey remains a scavenger from Jakku, whose power awakens without grand lineage. At first, her path crosses Han, Leia, and Luke. She resists the pull of Kylo Ren and chooses compassion and courage when her ancestry is finally revealed. She is Palpatine's granddaughter, a descendant of the very Sith Lord who engineered the Clone War in the Empire. Yet she rejects his legacy and claims the Skywalker name instead. And behind so much of this stands Palpatine, exactly as the films present him, a patient Sith Lord hiding in plain sight, Senator, Chancellor Emperor, and finally, a resurrected tyrant on Exegol. He manipulates, the Clone War orchestrates Order 66, and returns through forbidden knowledge of the dark side, not as a misunderstood guardian, but as the architect of galactic suffering for thousands of years of Sith tradition, distilled into one man taken at face value. These arcs already hold enough irony. Padmé dying as Anakin is reborn as Vader, Jar Jar helping the very empire that will crush his world, Mace's attempt to save the Republic, triggering its fall. Luke becoming the reclusive figure he once might have feared. Rey ending a dynasty she never asked to join. The films contain unanswered questions and shadows, but not every shadow hides another conspiracy. Theories can be a kind of war against uncertainty, always searching for another hidden hand, another secret Sith. Yet there is a quiet relief in accepting the story of the saga, as it is the Force moving through flawed people who win and lose, without invisible puppeteers. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history is rare in truth. Most choices simply stand. Consequences follow, and the galaxy endures as the pace slows. The canon itself becomes a place of rest. The familiar binary suns of Tatooine, the hum of a lightsaber, the rise and fall of the Empire. All of it clear and unmysterious on the surface, enough to revisit endlessly without adding anything more. And in that stillness, another question waits: if the story is allowed to simply end what remains in the silence beyond the crawl. Why we break the galaxy, the human need behind terrible theories. In that silence, a different kind of turbulence begins, not in the Galactic Senate or on a battlefield, but in the minds of those who return to this story again and again. Power fades from the screen, yet the need to understand, to reshape, to resist the ending does not disappear. It simply moves inward. The story of terrible theories begins there, not with malice but with a quiet refusal to let the final shot be the final word for many. The first impulse is control. When a beloved Jedi falls from a window, when a queen dies of grief, when an empire rises again, against all reason the narrative feels indifferent to personal attachment. So another narrative is constructed in its place. In that version, Mace Windu survives his fall through the Force, vanishing into the depths of Coruscant to continue the war from the shadows. In that version, Palpatine does not truly extinguish Padme, but hides her away as part of some deeper contingency plan. What followed was not acceptance, but an attempt to bend fate backward until loss becomes strategy over time. Disappointment hardens into puzzles. The mind treats unwelcome choices as if they must conceal some hidden architecture. If the sequel trilogy unsettles expectations, it becomes easier to imagine that the entire era is only a vision granted to Luke by the light side, or a nightmare inflicted by the dark side, rather than a canon that simply as Jar Jar's improbable rise to power transforms from awkward writing into evidence of a secret Sith mastermind whose every stumble is calculated, whose every gesture is a veiled display of control. The theory grows more intricate because the emotion beneath it remains unresolved. Beneath the complexity, there is also play. These constructions often function as a private hollow simulation, a space where the rules of the galaxy can be rewritten without threatening the official record. The Force becomes a sentient trickster, trolling the galactic stage for amusement, not because the texts demand it, but because the idea itself is a toy to be turned over, examined and exaggerated. This is not an empire to overthrow, but a sandbox to rearrange brick by brick around these ideas communities form. What begins as a stray thought on a forgotten forum thread becomes a shared project, debated, expanded, annotated, with obscure quotes from novels and commentaries. For thousands of years, the in-universe conflict between Sith and Jedi would shape galactic history. But between releases, the real struggle is simply to keep the conversation alive. Each new theory, no matter how implausible, becomes a signal flare in the dark, announcing that the story still matters. Seen this way, even the worst theories resemble strange love letters to the saga. They break the galaxy in order to stay inside it. They turn wounds into riddles and plot holes into invitations. And if that is true, another question emerges beneath the noise. If the need behind these theories is so human, what happens when speculation itself begins to take on a life of its own? The soft retcon, how headcanon lets us sleep at night. Speculation spreads, multiplies, mutates until it resembles a galactic war of interpretations. The Force is no longer a current running through the story, but a battlefield for competing explanations in that noise. Another quieter tradition emerges, one that does not demand power over the narrative, but offers a kind of private truce. This is headcanon. Headcanon is the story of a fan's own mind quietly filling in the dark between the stars. It is not a claim about what really happened in some absolute sense. It is a personal interpretation or gentle addition, a sense that somewhere between frames, Obi-Wan apologized to R2-D2 on Tatooine, or that Mace Windu's last conscious thought was not hatred, but an exhausted acceptance. Headcanon does not need to win an argument. It only needs to feel true enough to rest beside in practice. This means small scenes that the camera never showed imagined conversations in the Jedi Temple before the Clone Wars' subtle motives behind a single glance on the Death Star. A viewer might picture a brief moment after Endor, where Luke quietly returns Vader's lightsaber, to the pyre or Leia visiting Padme's grave on Naboo, guided by an instinct from the light side. What followed was not a new canon, but a soft retcon one that smooths rough edges without rewriting galactic history. This stands in sharp contrast to the grand reality-breaking theories that demand the entire saga be rebuilt around one idea: Jar Jar as a hidden Sith mastermind, Palpatine secretly preserving Padme in some dark laboratory, the Sequel Trilogy dismissed as nothing more than a prolonged Force vision. These are not soft adjustments. They are attempts at total control over the story. They insist that every scene, every line, every war must bend to a single secret. For sleep, that scale of conflict is restless. It pulls the mind into analysis, into debate, into a kind of internal council session. Headcanon moves in the opposite direction. Instead of asking whether the Force itself is a malevolent intelligence trolling the galaxy, it wonders how it felt for Yoda to hear Qui-Gon's voice for the first time on Polis Massa. Instead of insisting that Mace Windu survived to manipulate events from the shadows, it lingers on the wind over Coruscant's skyline. After his fall, the questions become smaller, and in that smallness, more human over time. Even the worst theories begin to resemble exaggerated communal headcanons, shared dreams tested aloud and then set aside. They can be visited briefly. Jar Jar as a dark architect of Empire the Force, as an unpredictable trickster. But they do not have to be believed for the next 1,000 years. They can remain curiosities in the archives, not new lore in the Jedi Code. In this quiet mode of thinking, the saga is allowed to breathe. The viewer drifts, not through arguments but through possibilities, and the galaxy far, far away grows dim enough to fall asleep. And yet, one more layer remains beyond private invention and chaotic theory. There is the question of how the storytellers themselves respond when the tide of speculation begins to wash back into the films. Falling asleep in a galaxy far, far away, turning noise into background lore. Beyond that question of author and audience, beyond the tension between canon and speculation, there is a quieter possibility hidden under all the noise. What if these theories are not puzzles to be solved but distant transmissions on a galactic network? Strange half-true rumors drifting through hyperspace from forgotten relays and abandoned listening posts. The story of these ideas becomes less a debate and more a background signal, a steady hum beneath the stars in that softer frame. Each claim about Jar Jar as a secret Sith mastermind or the Force, as a malevolent trickster, loses its demand for attention. Jar Jar's improbable acrobatics, his clumsy dives and impossible survival in battle can simply be heard as one more exaggerated report from a far-off world, a rumor passed from pilot to pilot until no one remembers where it began. It is noticed for a moment, appreciated as part of the wider texture of galactic history, and then allowed to pass by. In the dark of a quiet room, the theories become points of light beyond a viewport. One moment a transmission insists that Mace Windu survived his fall and vanished into the underworld of Coruscant, manipulating events from the shadows. The next, a faint signal claims that the entire Sequel Trilogy exists only as a Force vision in the mind of Luke Skywalker. Each message flares and fades. The mind registers the shape of the idea, but does not follow it into conflict or argument. It moves on over time. The rhythm of the saga itself begins to take over. For thousands of years in universe, the pattern remains the same. Light side and dark side rise and fall. Republic and Empire clash. Jedi and Sith emerge from obscurity and then return to myth. What followed was always another cycle, another war, another attempt at balance that never quite holds even the worst theories echo. That pattern, they rise in attention, gain power in discussion, and then drift back into the background of the galactic conversation. In this slower mode, curiosity remains, but urgency dissolves. There is no mystery that must be untangled before sleep, no hidden code in Palpatine's promises about saving Padme, no secret map that proves the Force is a cruel intelligence trolling an unsuspecting galaxy. The questions are allowed to exist without demanding answers. The mind observes them as it might watch a distant hyperspace lane where ships appear as brief streaks of light and then are gone as sentences lengthen and the pace settles. The analytical edge of the journey falls away. The focus shifts from proving or disproving each rumor to simply letting the flow of speculation mirror the vastness of the Force itself. What they found there would change everything. Becomes just another phrase from an old holocron, a familiar cadence in a much older song, and somewhere beyond these drifting transmissions, another layer of the story waits the moment when storytellers and audience are meet again and decide what remains and what fades into legend, from cursed to cozy, reframing the worst theories as gentle what-ifs. In that older song, the most cursed theories begin to soften, their sharp edges worn down by distance until they resemble quiet echoes rather than galactic threats. Power corrupts, but what happens when that power is contained in gentle, unused branches of possibility, never quite touching the mainstream of history? The answer is a forest of parallel paths, each one shaded, silent and harmless. In one of those paths, Jar Jar Binks truly is a hidden Sith mastermind, every stumble a calculated move, every wide-eyed grin a mask for the dark side. Yet in this reframed vision, he is not a menace to canon, only a figure wandering down a side trail the films never chose to follow. The story of the prequels remains the same. This Shadow Jar Jar simply walks beside it, a phantom strategist in a timeline that never solidified. Along another path, Mace Windu survives his fall, broken but alive, sustained by stubborn will and the Force. Over time, he becomes an unseen guardian in the underlevels of Coruscant, nudging events in ways the main saga never acknowledges. In yet another branch, Padme is secretly saved by forbidden techniques Palpatine once described, hidden away as a living secret. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history in that quiet universe, yet here it remains only a soft outline, an unchosen option resting just beyond the edge of the screen. Further out in this forest of maybes, the sequel trilogy unfolds as a vast Force vision, glimpsed by Luke in a single night on Arch-2. In that version, every triumph and failure is a warning, not a record, a dream that dissolves with the first light of dawn. On another distant branch, the Force itself behaves as a capricious intelligence, trolling Sith and Jedi alike with improbable coincidences and cruel ironies, not as a canon truth, but as a playful thought experiment that never leaves the realm of speculation. Imagining these branches can make the main timeline feel more solid by contrast. The central narrative becomes the path that was actually chosen through the forest, the single trail pressed into the ground by the march of galactic events. What followed was not an accident, it is simply the route that endured while countless other possibilities remained missed, never coalescing into war, empire, or recorded history. In the quiet of early development, some of these branches might have existed as real conversations in distant writers' rooms. A darker Jar Jar, a surviving Mace, a different fate for Padme, a stranger will for the Force. Each could have been tested, sketched, then set aside. For the next 1,000 years of fandom, they linger as ghost pictures, half-remembered whispers of stories that almost were. There is a gentle pleasure in letting these what-ifs unfold, not as demands for change, but as exercises of imagination that can be picked up and set down at any moment. They drift through the mind as the body drifts towards sleep, comforting in their unreality. And when the moment comes to return to the films themselves, these alternate versions can fade into the background, receding like half-remembered dreams upon waking, while the chosen story of the galaxy continues on its singular path. The long view of the Force, cycles, myths, and the stories we tell ourselves. Yet, in another sense, the story of this galaxy has never had a single path at all. Ancient cultures told tales of gods and heroes that shifted from valley to valley, island to island, each region insisting on its own version of the same war, the same betrayal, the same fragile peace. Power rose and fell, not once, but in cycles, retold for thousands of years until the edges blurred and only the core pattern remained. Star Wars sits in that same stream of myth. One world might have spoken of a thunder god. This age speaks of Jedi
and Sith, of an empire and a rebellion. In one telling, a trickster nudges empires toward ruin with a misplaced word. In another, that trickster becomes Jar Jar Binks, recast by late-night speculation as a secret Sith mastermind whose clumsiness is only a mask. What followed was a modern version of an ancient habit, taking a familiar fool and imagining hidden power behind the smile. In older epics, some poets swore a hero died on the battlefield, while others whispered that he survived, maimed but watching from the shadows. The Mace Windu survival theories echo that same instinct. Thrown from a Coruscant tower by the dark side, no body recovered. His purple blade extinguished in the storm, he is recast as the unseen hand behind later conflict. Over time, the line between canon and conjecture begins to resemble the way myths once diverged around a single fallen king. The Force itself invites this constant reworking. It is described as an energy field, a will, a balance, a current of both dark side and light side, but never pinned down so tightly that only one meaning survives. For some, it becomes a spiritual metaphor, a quiet assurance that there is pattern in chaos. For others, in more restless hours, it becomes a cosmic prankster, a sentient presence trolling the galactic stage, turning the entire sequel era into a vision, a dream, a test inflicted on Luke by something unseen. In another age, storytellers would have called that a god's riddle. Even the worst theories, the ones that twist Palpatine into a secret savior of Padme, or insist that every defeat was planned from the beginning, are part of this long tradition. They are exaggerations, corrections, alternate verses in a song that never truly ends. There is room in this galaxy for the official chronicle carved into holocrons, and for the hushed, improbable versions traded in forums and midnight conversations. For tonight, there is no need to choose. The canon story of the Jedi, the Sith, and the Empire can rest undisturbed, while the stranger variations drift past at a distance, observed but not embraced, distant ships on a quiet hyperspace lane. From that calm vantage point, all these myths flatten into gentle patterns, rise and fall, dark and light, war and uneasy peace. Yet even here, in the stillness between interpretations, another question waits in the shadows of the Force, ready to pull the next theory out of the dark. Letting go like a Jedi, releasing the need for the perfect explanation. In that waiting silence, another truth emerges from the dark. Not every question in this galaxy is meant to be hunted to extinction. Some are meant to drift, unresolved, like distant stars beyond the edge of any charted hyperspace lane. For thousands of years, the Jedi taught that the tighter a mind grips an outcome, the more fragile that outcome becomes. The story of Anakin Skywalker is the clearest warning. Faced with visions of Padme's death, he did not trust the Force or change or loss. He trusted only control. What followed was a desperate campaign to bend destiny into a fixed shape, to force the galactic story to obey one frightened heart. That same impulse appears in miniature whenever a fan theory tries to seize power over the narrative. Jar Jar must be a secret Sith mastermind. Palpatine must have saved Padme and hidden her away.
Mace Windu must have survived and must be directing events from the shadows. Each new theory becomes one more attempt to hold the saga in a closed fist, to refuse any version of the story that does not match an internal design. The Jedi taught the opposite. Let go. Trust the living force. Accept that the light side and the dark side will never fully explain themselves. Even Yoda, with centuries of history behind him, admitted that the future was always in motion. Outcomes slipped through his fingers. Entire wars unfolded in ways he would not have chosen. Yet over time, his answer was not to construct more elaborate explanations. His answer was stillness and a deeper surrender to what the Force revealed. There is a quiet lesson hidden inside these worst theories. Releasing the need to fix Star Wars, to patch every hole with a new layer of speculation, can become a small rehearsal for releasing other anxieties that cling with the same intensity. If the Empire does not need to be secretly controlled by Jar Jar, perhaps every uncertainty in an ordinary day does not need to be secretly controlled either. Now the breath becomes part of the story. A slow inhale gathers the entire tangled web of Sith Jar Jar plots, secret survival escapes, and malevolent Force pranksters. A slower exhale lets one of them go. One theory drifts away into the dark. Then another. One complaint dissolves. One unanswered question about the sequels fades into the background hum of the galactic war, no longer demanding resolution. Pattern interrupt. Not every mystery in this saga is a puzzle. Some are simply a weather in the Force, passing storms that do not need a name. As the body settles, rest itself becomes an act of trust. Trust that the story can stand without constant reconstruction. Trust that the galaxy will still be there in the morning, with all its imperfect canon, its fractured timelines, its unresolved debates. For the next 1,000 years of imagined history, the Force will continue to move through dark and light, without any single mind holding it together. Sleep becomes a quiet agreement with that truth, and a promise that the saga will still be waiting when awareness returns. Drifting past the outer rim, a slow recap of the night's journey. In that quiet agreement, the mind begins to drift backward through the strange constellations it has already crossed tonight, tracing once more the faint outlines of impossible ideas before they fade. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power is handed to the most unlikely figures in the galaxy, or to the Force itself? The answer, in these late hours, is the story of theories that were never meant to hold the weight of truth, only the soft gravity of imagination. Somewhere far behind now hangs the world of Jar Jar Binks as a secret Sith mastermind, a distant planet of clumsy steps hiding calculated moves, of a single Gungan quietly steering a galactic war. Not far from it, another dim sphere turns in the dark, the place where Mace Windu survives his shattering fall, the purple glow of his saber replaced by the colder light of a hidden survivor moving through the shadows. Each theory had its own dark side of possibility and its own light side of absurdity, its own small empire of what-ifs. Deeper in the starfield, the preserved image of Padme Amidala drifts past, a quiet world built on the idea that she never truly died, only vanished into a chamber of secret machinery and forbidden technique. Beside it, the sequels themselves become a wavering moon, not solid ground, but an extended vision in the Force, a dream flickering behind Luke Skywalker's closed eyes. What followed was not a new trilogy, but a long, uncertain premonition, a galactic storm glimpsed from a single island on the edge of the map. Farthest out of all, there is the cold, slow-turning notion that the Force is not merely balance, but a sentient prankster bending events toward chaos. In that lonely orbit, the Jedi and the Sith are not rival orders, only pieces moved in a game whose rules no one understands. Over time, each of these worlds has gathered fragments of evidence, stray lines of dialogue, abandoned concepts, tiny gravitational pulls that keep them from drifting entirely away. Yet none of them demand belief. They are stories about stories, reflections of how deeply this galaxy has settled into galactic memory, how much conflict and mercy, war and peace, the mind is willing to rearrange just to stay a little longer among familiar stars. Even in the chaos, certain shapes return. The fallen mentor, the hidden emperor, the chosen one who fails, the mask, the throne, the endless struggle between dark and light. They appear again and again, like constellations that would shape the sky for thousands of years, no matter how many new legends are drawn between them. As the journey slows, the voice of the saga grows drowsy, sentences stretching, pauses widening, each theory receding into the same soft distance. What they found there would change everything in waking debates, but in this quieter hour, it changes nothing at all. The force remains, the images remain, and the ship continues forward into darker, gentler space, where only the faintest echoes of these worlds still follow. A thread of light in the dark side. What endures when theories fade? In the end, all the tangled speculation and elaborate diagrams fall away, and what remains is something far smaller and far more enduring. Power rises and falls, empires burn and rebuild, theories multiply in the dark, but the story of
this galaxy has always been simple at its core. Ordinary beings stand before impossible odds, hear the distant roar of a greater war, and choose not to run. Over time, the most persistent image is not a secret Sith mastermind hidden in a clownish Gungan, or a malevolent force playing tricks on the galactic stage. It is a farm boy staring at twin suns over a quiet desert, the sky opening into endless possibility. That binary sunset carries no hidden code, no conspiratorial frame. It is only longing, courage, and the first step toward the unknown. What followed was not a puzzle to be solved, but a life to be risked for others. The same is true in the smallest glances across a crowded hangar, or in the way a princess and a smuggler lean together after the battle ends. A single act of kindness on Endor, a hand extended to a frightened Ewok instead of a blaster, matters more than any theory that Palpatine secretly saved Padme or that Mace Windu survived to manipulate events in the all shadows. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history within the fiction, but in the quiet of the night, it reshapes something else. The sense that even in a universe ruled by the dark side, compassion still breaks through. For thousands of years within that imagined history, Sith and Jedi wage their endless conflict, yet the moments that endure are strangely gentle. A lightsaber igniting not in rage, but in defense. A ship jumping to hyperspace with a last look back at the friends left behind. A hug after a long war, armor creaking, eyes closed, the force settling around exhausted soldiers who have nothing clever left to say. When minds wander in the dark, do they truly cling to the idea that the sequel trilogy was only a dream? Or to the simple image of an old master raising a fallen X-wing from the sea? As sleep draws nearer, the galaxy itself becomes a kind of lullaby. Let the last images be simple ones. A cockpit bathed in starlight, hyperspace lines stretching into calm, infinity, a Jedi meditating while distant engines hum. Theories flicker and fade at the edges of awareness, but the light side and the dark side remain, patient and unhurried. When eyes open again, the stars will still be there. The Sith and Jedi still locked in their ancient dance, every wild idea waiting in the background, unchanged. The story continues, whether watched or not, a constant presence just beyond the next horizon. Closing the holocron, soft goodbye in a galaxy that never really ends out in that horizon. The galaxy keeps turning, but in this small corner of it, the holocron begins to close. Its facets dim, one by one, as if a lightsaber were slowly retracting into its hilt.
the last traces of power folding inward until only a soft glow remains. The story of these strange, half-serious theories quiets, yet the impressions they left continue to drift through the dark. In this quieter space, the worst ideas become oddly gentle. A secret Sith Jar Jar no longer schemes. In the Senate, he simply shuffles off stage, his exaggerated clumsiness reduced to a single, lingering image of a Gungan who might have been far more. Over time, that thought loses its edge and becomes something smaller, almost harmless. A reminder that in this galactic mythology, even the most unlikely figure can be recast in shadow. The same calm settles over the others. The notion of Palpatine quietly preserving Padme, hiding her away beyond the reach of Jedi and Senate, fades into a distant possibility. Or what if that no longer needs an answer? Mace Windu's fall becomes a slow-motion descent rather than a violent end, a purple blade spinning away into the night as the Force catches him or does not. The details of each theory blur at the edges, but the mood remains. A tapestry of dark side speculation drifting towards silence. For anyone still awake at this point, one small detail can be carried forward. Nothing heavy, nothing that pulls the mind back toward conflict or war. Perhaps it is only the image of a lone moisture farm on Tatooine, where someone insists that all of this has happened before and will happen again, and no one believes them. Or the idea that the Force itself, with its own quiet will, sometimes nudges events not toward terror, but towards something gently absurd. It is entirely acceptable if sections vanished into dream while this unfolded. This was never a test of attention, never a strict chronicle that demanded every beat be remembered. For thousands of years in-universe, Jedi and Sith have missed pieces of their own history, and what followed was still a coherent saga. In the same way, this wandering through improbable theories is meant to be something that can be entered and left at any point, a soft current rather than a rigid path. Now the camera pulls back. A single window on Coruscant shows a tiny room where a hollow projector finally dims, its last blue light fading against the endless city. Further away, a lone homestead on Tatooine lets its exterior lamps wink out, one after another, until only starlight remains. The galactic map zooms outward, systems shrinking to dust, arguments over canon and speculation dissolving into a quiet hum. Somewhere out there, a new theory begins to form, almost imperceptible, waiting in the dark for the moment it will be named. Your turn in the council chamber, a gentle call to share and return. Out in that quiet, as the last argument dissolves into static, another presence waits in the shadows of the galactic mind. Not a Sith Lord, not a Jedi Master, but a half-formed idea about Jar Jar, or Mace Windu, or the Force itself playing some elaborate joke. Over time, these stray thoughts gather, collide, and become the stories fans tell each other in hushed tones, half in horror and half in fascination. When morning comes, or when the app opens again and the glow of the screen returns, the council chamber of theories will still be here. Somewhere below, a comment field stretches out like a holocron archive, ready to record the worst Star Wars theory ever heard, or the one quietly believed for far too long. Perhaps it is Jar Jar as a hidden Sith mastermind, pulling strings behind the Senate. Perhaps it is the claim that the sequel trilogy is nothing more than a single, unbroken Force vision in Luke's mind. Whatever form it takes, the story of that theory can be set down here, filed among the others. For those who prefer verdicts to chronicles, there may be a small marker near the top, a pinned note, or a simple poll asking which idea feels the most cursed of all. Did the notion of a malevolent, trolling force disturb the balance more than any empire or war? Did the suggestion that Palpatine secretly preserved Padme's life, only to hide her away, bend the light side and dark side into something stranger than canon ever dared? A quiet vote can be cast there, long after the main narrative has faded into background noise. This chamber is not built, for a single visit. It is meant to be returned to, a familiar corridor of galactic history and fan speculation that can hum gently in the dark while eyelids grow heavy. The same names will drift by again and again: Sith and Jedi, Republic and Empire, strange conflicts that never made it to the screen, and theories that probably never should have. Each pass-through will soften the edges further, until the most cursed ideas become nothing more than distant stars. Beyond this room, there are countless other corners of the galaxy waiting. Entire campaigns of the Old Republic where obscure Sith cults rise and fall. Forgotten Jedi enclaves whose failures would shape eras yet to come. Even the quiet question of whether the Force itself has a will that nudges events, or whether that, too, is only another theory born in the dark. What followed was always another story, another sector, another legend that could be unfolded in the same calm, measured way. So the tale rests here for now, not ended, only paused. The viewport remains, full of slow-moving stars that slip by without sound, as if the whole galactic map were breathing in its sleep. Somewhere, another impossible theory is forming, waiting in the dark for the moment it will be named.